Hi, this is George Mueller, and this is an introduction to Chapter 7 and 8 for students in my History 101 class. This section will cover the end of the Roman Empire, its transition to the Byzantine Empire, the development of Islam, and the early Middle Ages. Now, when we start off with this, we have a really large Roman Empire that's really too spread out to easily take care of itself. And it's a Roman Empire that has some serious problems. It has internal political problems. It's physically too large to easily rule uh, by one group or one person. It's being constantly invaded by its neighbors. And while the population is growing in groups around the empire, it's constantly shrinking within the empire. And this is a really frightening phenomenon because we can't explain it. There was an outbreak of plague, a repeated outbreak of plague, but that had happened at other times in the ancient world and really didn't hurt population growth in the long term all that much. But in this case, population growth stops, and we actually have Romans abandoning farmland, good farmland. And that's not the only problem the Romans are facing. Religiously, Christianity is rising in popularity, and this creates a feeling of a cultural break, both with the past and between Christians and non-Christians. And yes, I have been attacked by a cat. We'll just ignore her and keep going. And this leads to how you can deal with these kind of problems. Diocletian and Constantine were the first Roman emperors to really make a concerted effort to really make basic reforms to the empire. And they really fundamentally change it. The first thing they do is divide the empire up. This is going to eventually lead to the empire permanently dividing. They're also going to vacillate in how they deal with Christianity. Diocletian will try and persecute Christians, hoping to drive them out of the empire. When that fails, Constantine will issue the Edict of Milan and use Christianity as a kind of, well, propaganda tool. But it's one that comes with problems. Once the Christian religion becomes associated with the empire, then the empire has to deal with problems within the religion, including the problem of heresy. And heresy is the idea that within Christianity or any other religion like Christianity, you need to keep everybody making the same decisions. In this case, a version of Christianity called Arianism developed in Egypt and then spread throughout Europe, particularly to some German tribes. And Arianism says Jesus was a prophet sent by God, not part of God. Now, the rest of the Christian church said Jesus was also divine. Politically, this was a threat. Most governments throughout most of history have tried to keep their population mono-religious. That is, not allowing there to be major religious divisions within their country. And Constantine called the Council of Nicaea to clear up this problem, make a decision. He didn't really care which way they went with it, as long as they decided, and then everybody did it. Ultimately, this sets the standard for Christianity, but Arianism doesn't die out for hundreds of years. Now, militarily, Diocletian and Constantine make some changes to the Roman army. They're expensive changes, though, and this hurts the economy, creates inflation. To fight inflation, they create price controls, setting a maximum price on various goods. This is a ham-fisted way for a government to fight inflation and try and control its economy. And it's one that doesn't work. It's tempting. Governments up to, well, the US in the 1970s and Greece and Spain in the right now this month have tried this, and it doesn't work very well. With the falling population, Diocletian and Constantine and the Roman Empire in general increasingly bound people into hereditary jobs. Whatever your father did, you will now do. They also tried to increase consumer confidence by issuing a new coin called the solidus that is supposed to be immune to inflation. It fails, of course. And what this all does is it creates a system where most taxation falls onto agriculture. Businesses are completely untaxed, and they don't have an income tax, so it's farmers. And it creates hardship for the lowest levels of society, and it's made worse by incredible corruption. Now, the Western Empire is going to fall. Remember I said the empire had been divided up? Well, this makes it too easy to just lose control of one piece. And what really happens is kind of interesting. It's not that there's a formal invasion that destroys the empire, it's really more subtle. What happened was a huge group of Asiatic tribes called the Huns were moving to the west. And as they moved to the west, they encountered Germanic tribes, causing them to move to the west in front of the Huns. One of these groups was the Visigoths. Now, the Visigoths had a very cunning plan. They were going to ally with the Roman Empire, and they wanted to move behind certain geographical features that they felt they could defend. And their idea was the Romans had empty land that they wanted. The Romans also had food, and the Visigoths had men who were willing to fight. So they could stop the Huns, work with Rome, they'd get land, Rome would get not invaded by Huns, which is always a good thing, and everybody wins, except the Huns. Well, as it turns out, the Romans dealt so poorly with the Visigoths that eventually the Visigoths fought the Romans and went so far as to kill an emperor and then sack Rome itself in 410, and then simply take part of Spain to be theirs. So they got away from the Huns by the very simple expedient of going a long way to the west. And by the way, the next Roman emperor formally gave them the land and made them a Roman army. If you can't beat them, join them, I guess. And this is what happens, is tribe after tribe moves into the Roman Empire, and the Romans take them on as soldiers and eventually give them citizenship. But instead of these Germans becoming Romans, Rome becomes more and more German. And the land that they settle in, they're allowed to use their own laws. So you have people who theoretically are part of the empire, but culturally, linguistically, politically, they're not. They're their own thing. And that's really what happens. The Roman Empire just becomes inconvenient. It stops really doing anything, and eventually it gets to the point where the office of Roman Emperor is so worthless that a Germanic captain who theoretically works for the Roman Empire deposed the last Roman emperor and sent the Roman regalia to the east. It was actually sent back, and he put it in a closet and apparently forgot about it and didn't even bother to put the fact that he was the nominal Roman emperor onto documents. It's kind of a sad fall for one of the largest empires in history. And this new society that controls Europe is very different from Rome. Germanic law is different. It has recognized blood feuds. It has trial by ordeal. Their approach to family and marriage is very different. The Roman Church has a much greater role to play in tying together Europe culturally. Really more of a role than any religion had ever played for Rome. And sexual morals are going to change over time. We'll get to those a little bit more later. Now, the Eastern Empire, the Byzantine Empire, had one last try for glory. Under Justinian the Great and his controversial and interesting wife Theodora, who was a bear dancer, and we don't know what kind of bear, and we don't know what the heck that means, but together, they had invaded Western Europe and tried to reestablish the empire, and did very briefly. A far more important thing that Justinian did was codify the law. This is the Corpus Juris Civilis, which is the basis for modern continental European law. And it's one of the reasons why European law and American law, which is based on English common law, are not compatible. And the empire in the east, known as the Byzantine Empire, has some basic facts it has to deal with. Their borders shrank. They speak Greek, not Latin. They have to deal with external threats from Islam, a group known as the Slavs, the Bulgars, and internally they have religious divisions, including the idea of iconoclasm. This is a anger that causes enormous riots at times over the use of religious iconography. And they make a lot of money off of trade, but because of this reliance on trade, their agricultural base shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, and anything that cuts off trade hurts the empire more. Then they have no money to defend the empire, and it shrinks even more. And that's where we get to Islam. Now, this is a very, very brief introduction to the origins of Islam. This is a religion that has a rich and diverse history, and it's changed a lot over the years. Before we can talk about Islam, we have to mention something about what was going on before Islam appeared. The Arabian Peninsula had just never been its own thing. It had been dominated by other political entities. And for most people in the region, the most important social obligation isn't a nation or a city, it's your extended family. And at the same time, this is a place that's making money. Trade routes had shifted, and, well, they were going through the area, and there was a lot of money to be made. And one of the people making this money was a man named Muhammad. He was born to a respectable part of a tribe in 570, but he's left an orphan relatively young. Muhammad is going to claim that he hears voices while camping out in the desert, the literal voice of God talking to him, and that it leads him to create a new religion that incorporates some local beliefs and some local tendencies and some of the ideas of Judeanity and Christianity into a religion that is supposed to replace them. So it's closely related to Christianity and Judaism, but is its own entity. And it's going to prove a popular new religion. It will spread with extreme rapidity. And it's not a surprise. The pagan religions that had been in the area didn't stress morality, and there was, frankly, a lot of political strife that the development of Islam really put an end to. Now, here's a place where I'm not going to just present things to you. There are a few things that you should look for. What's the Quran? You should definitely be familiar with this. Your textbook also mentions the 5 pillars of Islam and what Ramadan is. Also, Sharia. This is something that comes up a lot in modern politics and modern news stories. Something your textbook doesn't explain that I think helps explain, well, how Islam spread so quickly is the idea of the Ummah Muslima. This is something that used to be invoked a lot more than it is in the modern world. And it's the idea of a giant community of all Muslim believers, kind of a super family. Another thing that's worth mentioning is the Summa or the Hadith. And this is good practice. It's compiled in the 9th century, and it explains how to be a good Muslim in ways that aren't in the Quran itself. And this is where I have a question for you. Think about this from your experience. Where, besides the Bible, do Christians get their theological training? Or alternatively, whatever religion you happen to be practicing or be most familiar with, where besides the Holy Book and formal books of that religion do you receive training? Just consider it for a moment. After Muhammad's death, Islam was left with a problem. Who do you have follow up the prophet of your religion? In the case of Islam, they went first with his family, then with political leaders who were considered especially holy, and then eventually with more standard political leaders, creating the Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties, amongst others. So this is going to give you an overview of where Islam was very early on. If you have any questions, feel free to call me. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.